Have you ever mocked faith? Have you ever looked at someone who believed in God and thought, poor, deluded people? Have you ever told yourself that all of this, church, Bible, prayer, was just a theater for those who are afraid of reality? So it is. He thought so too. He laughed. He challenged. He called everything an illusion. He said that if God existed, he would have to come down from heaven to convince him. Only, that night, something really came down, and what seemed like just another empty dawn became the beginning of the biggest transformation of his life. He was alone, as always. I didn't believe in anything or anyone, and behind the sarcasm, behind the jokes, there was an emptiness that grew every day. He had friends, but he moved away. Family. I didn't want to talk. God. It was just a name he used when teasing. Inside, he no longer had peace, but outside, he continued to mock. He said faith was a crutch. What a weak believer. That no one needed an invisible being to live. But what he didn't know is that heaven was listening to everything, and that God answers even the mockers. That night, at the height of his insomnia, he turned on the TV just to escape the silence. And it was there, on that old screen, that the answer arrived. Billy Graham, in a sermon recorded decades ago, began to speak, and it seemed like it was talking directly to him, as if he knew your story, your thoughts, your pain. And that's when the laughter disappeared. The arrogance fell. The faith he mocked now made him cry. The hardened heart began to tremble. And what happened after that, you need to see with your own eyes. He couldn't explain it. He couldn't understand how that voice from decades ago, transmitted by an old TV in the middle of the night, seemed to know exactly what was going on inside him. Billy Graham spoke with a firmness that cut, but with a love that welcomed. He was paralyzed. It didn't blink. Each word seemed to dismantle a wall that he took years to build. And when he heard, "Even though you mocked, God still loves you. God is still calling you," he collapsed. The skeptic fell to his knees. The mocker cried like a child. For the first time, he had no more arguments, just tears, just true, only God. And maybe you're feeling this way too right now. Maybe you too have closed yourself off, been mocked, rejected, but you feel deep in your chest that something is stirring inside, that this story is not just any story, that this video found you for a greater reason. So I want to make you a simple but powerful invitation. Write the word prayer here in the comments. If you felt God speak to you in this video, even if you still have doubts, even if you are conflicted, write. We will pray for you, name by name, because no one who asks God for help goes without an answer. And if you know someone who also needs to hear this, share this video now. This could be the sign this person has been asking for. Don't leave here without leaving your like. This helps this message reach more people like you. And subscribe to the channel, because this is just the beginning. Real stories, testimonies of transformation, words that heal and confront are yet to come. And if you've come this far, it's because God still has something to tell you, and he will keep talking. He was the type of person who made an impression when he spoke. Intelligent, articulate, confident. He had good arguments, a stable career, a strong presence. At work, he was respected. Colleagues saw him as above average, cult, objective, owner of his choices. But there was one thing he always made clear, with an almost mocking tone. He didn't believe in God. For him, faith was an illusion, a fragile invention for those who couldn't bear to face life as it is. When he heard someone talk about prayer, the Bible, or even hope, he would smile with contempt and say, "These things are just emotional crutches. Those who need God are, because they don't know how to think." He wasn't aggressive. I didn't want to convince anyone to stop believing, but he made a point of making it clear that he wasn't fooled by that. "If God exists," he said ironically, "may he prove it to me. May he come down here and talk to me, because until now, the only God I see is chance." And when he heard about preaching, about Billy Graham, about these stories of people who gave up everything for blind faith, he couldn't hide his laughter. I thought it was all a big theater, where people ran away from reality under the pretext of listening to the divine voice. But what no one saw was that inside, he was emptying himself, and fast. Laughter was just the lid of a well that sank a little deeper every day. Anxiety attacks began to appear. In the beginning, they were small, a tightness in the chest, a shorter breath. I thought it was stress, that it was only for people who worked too much. But then came the lapses in thought. Sometimes, in the 5 middle of a meeting, he would find himself staring into space, feeling as if he were floating outside his body. He started avoiding crowded places. He got angry about anything. The nights became long, sleepless, suffocating. On the outside, he continued with the same speech. He continued to mock. He continued to laugh at other people's preaching and prayers. But inside, I was already imploding. He began to have dark thoughts, not about religion, about existence, about why you're alive, about what would happen if you just stopped existing. He didn't want to kill himself, but he also didn't see the point in continuing. Life had lost its taste. Relationships became superficial. Moments of pleasure no longer brought relief. What once made him feel alive now only served to numb him for a few hours. And then, everything came back. The feeling of being lost. The silent pain of being a staunch but emotionally broken skeptic. Sometimes he looked up to the sky, not in search of answers, but in a provocative tone. "If you really exist, why are you silent?" he whispered, almost voiceless. It was a mixture of anger, pride, and despair, because deep down, he wanted to be surprised. He wanted to see if this God, who so many people said was real, was able to reach him too. But of course I would never admit that out loud. Still, the request came out, even if it was masked as sarcasm, a request camouflaged in a proud but tired soul. It was during one of these early mornings that something out of the ordinary happened. He was alone at home, as he almost always was, sitting on the couch with the living room light off. I had drunk something to try to sleep, but the effect seemed to be the opposite. The silence in the apartment bothered him more than the noise. He turned on the TV without even thinking about what he wanted to watch. He flipped through channels without stopping, until it stopped. By chance? Perhaps. But inside him, he knew it wasn't. The screen showed an ancient crusade. The image was in black and white. The voice was familiar. Even without knowing him, he knew who he was. It was Billy Graham. At first, he thought about changing the channel. He rolled his eyes. Really? Preaching now? But it hasn't changed. The voice held him back. The way Billy Graham spoke was different. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't manipulation. It was calm, firm, as if speaking directly to someone specific. And for some reason he couldn't explain, he started listening. Just listen. No resistance. And that's when Billy Graham said, "Even though you have mocked God, He has not given up on you. You may have turned your back on Him, but He is still looking at you with love." It was as if time stopped, as if that sentence crossed the room, the chest, the pride, and hit straight to the heart. He didn't know what was happening, but his eyes started to burn, and for the first time he cried, not a dramatic cry, but a silent cry, trapped for years. A cry that said, "I can no longer pretend that everything is okay. And maybe if you're watching this right now, it's because God is speaking to you too. Maybe you've also mocked, doubted, or simply walked away. Maybe you're still living in this rational prison, trying to convince yourself that you're in control, but inside, you know you need something bigger. Who needs God? If this story spoke to you, I want you to leave a comment in the comments. Prayer. Write sincerely, and if you feel it in your heart, also comment, "I heard," or even, "He spoke to me." Let's pray for you, name by name, because this isn't just another story. It could be the beginning of yours, and what happens after that will show you that when God decides to respond, He does so in a way you would never expect. The dawn seemed like all the others, silent, dark, loaded with that invisible weight that only those who have spent sleepless nights with their minds spinning non-stop know. He tossed and turned on the couch. I was trying to find a comfortable position, but there was no comfort, not in the body, not in the soul. The thoughts came like waves, strong, disorganized. Old memories, questions, doubts, guilt, all mixing together in an internal mess that seemed impossible to organize. It was as if the mind was screaming, without rest. With each passing minute, the anguish increased. time did not flow, it stagnated within the void itself. In an attempt to silence that mental noise, he picked up the remote control and turned on the TV. I didn't want to watch anything in particular. I just wanted external noise to try to drown out the internal noise. He started switching channels without focus, without interest. He went through movies, news, sales programs, all nonsense, until, suddenly, a different image caught his attention. It was an old video. The quality of the recording showed that it was not something recent. The camera filmed a silent crowd. A man in a dark suit walked across the stage with the Bible in his hand. The voice, firm and serene, began to fill the room. He almost changed the channel. Almost. But there was something in that voice that held him back. That way of speaking was not common. It was not an inflammatory or theatrical religious speech. It was direct, deep, as if every word had been carefully chosen to cut through layers he didn't even know existed. He continued watching. Something inside him, that had been dormant for a long time, began to stir. The image became clearer. The name appeared in the corner of the screen. Billy Graham. He recognized the name. He had already heard about it, but always ignored it. He was never interested. I thought he was just another famous preacher who spoke to crowds thirsty for hope. But, for some inexplicable reason, that morning, in that room, that voice found space. And it wasn't a rational space. It was a spiritual space. It was as if something inside him, deeper than logic, older than doubt, was being touched. Billy Graham talked about unbelief. He talked about men who mocked God, men who carried pride, arrogance, sarcasm, and who, even so, were still targets of God's love. He spoke with authority, but without condemnation, truly, but without aggression. And then came the sentence. That sentence that disarmed everything. Even if you mocked God, He is still calling you. At that moment, time stopped. It was as if the entire universe had fallen silent to make room for just those words. He froze. The controller fell out of his hand. Breathing became heavier. My eyes started to water without warning. And the truth is, he didn't even know why he was crying. He wasn't one to cry. He has always prided himself on being strong, cold, analytical. But those words pierced him like an invisible sword. They hurt, but at the same time, they healed. It was as if the sentence had been written exactly for him, as if God had kept that recording for decades, waiting for the right moment to deliver it. And that moment had arrived. The mask fell. The hardness has been broken. He was no longer the confident skeptic, the wry scoffer. He was just a broken man, sitting in the dark, listening to an eternal call that came from a place he didn't understand, but that, for the first time, he wanted to answer. The tears were flowing freely now. There was no more resistance. He felt exposed, fragile, but also welcomed. Because even though he had mocked, even though he had said in all words that God did not exist, now he felt with every part of his being that God was there, and he was talking, not with screams, not with thunder, but with love. Billy Graham continued to preach. It talked about regret, about grace, about redemption. And the more he listened, the more everything inside him fell apart. But it was not a destruction to the end. It was a demolition for rebirth. It was as if God was saying, "You laughed at me. You defied me. You tried to hide behind reason. But I'm still here. Because I love you. And because I never gave up on you." He fell to his knees, not as a religious person, not as someone who knew what to do, but as someone who finally admitted that they needed help. For the first time, he prayed, not with nice words, not with rehearsed phrases, but with the soul, in pain, truly, with brokenness. I just said, if the Lord is really here, I don't know how to deal with this, but I'm here. Help me. And this prayer, short, sincere, was the beginning of the change he never imagined experiencing. Maybe as you watch this now, you're feeling the same thing. Maybe you've made fun of it too. Already doubted. He's already walked away. I've said phrases that today you would rethink. Maybe you've used pride as a shield, as a way to avoid pain. But if there's one thing this story proves, it's that not even human contempt can silence God's love. And if you feel like something inside you is being touched right now, even if it's uncomfortable, even if you can't explain it, I want to tell you that it's not a coincidence. This is not just another video. This is a date. It is God, once again, using the improbable to achieve the impossible. He tried, with all the strength he had left, to grab the remote control, maybe on impulse, maybe as a last act of resistance. But the fingers didn't obey. The hand shook, the control slipped. His heart was pounding, as if something inside him was about to explode. The mind told me to turn off the TV, to stop doing that, to not get carried away by cheap emotions. But the spirit was being torn apart from within. There was no longer room for skepticism. What he had always considered an illusion now had a face, a voice, and a presence, and he didn't know how to deal with it. Billy Graham's voice still filled the room, firm, direct, with an authority that did not come from men. He talked about forgiveness, about mercy, about new beginnings that seemed impossible. He talked about men who spent their entire lives mocking God, until, at the limit of their souls, they were surprised by a grace that didn't make sense. It was as if he was reading the biography of that man kneeling on the ground. With each sentence, he felt exposed, confronted, broken, but at the same time, embraced. For once, he wasn't trying to win a spiritual debate. He was listening, in truth, with the soul. The tears flowed uncontrollably. It wasn't goosebump-inducing emotion. It was pain being exposed. It was pride being demolished. It was the weight of denial falling like stones from shoulders. He had never prayed in his life. I had never spoken to God honestly. But there, on that cold floor, surrounded only by the light of the TV and the darkness of the early morning, he opened his mouth and, in a trembling voice, whispered, "If the Lord is really here, I don't know what to do, but I'm here. Forgive me. Change me." And what happened after that was no mystical spectacle. It was not a supernatural manifestation with lights and voices from heaven, but it was, without a doubt, the most sacred moment of his entire existence. The environment remained the same. The room, silent. Television, broadcasting that ancient crusade. But inside him, everything was changing. He felt as if a chain that had bound him for years had been broken. I couldn't explain how, but I felt like something invisible had moved. That night, he didn't sleep. I couldn't. I didn't want to. I felt that every second was important. That meeting could not be interrupted. He stayed there, prostrate, listening, crying, murmuring broken words, trying in some way to give a name to what he was feeling. It was as if everything was being rearranged from within. The once chaotic thoughts were calming down. The questions had not disappeared, but now they were accompanied by a new voice, a voice that said, "I am here." He spent the entire night in this state of confrontation and surrender, a night that began with mockery and ended with worship, a dawn where silence, once suffocating, became a sacred space. There was no music, there was no crowd, there was no church, no pastor, just him, God, and an old sermon from Billy Graham that seemed to have spanned decades just to reach him in that dark room. When the sun began to rise, he was still there. The swollen eyes, the light soul, the sore head, but the warm heart. It was like waking up from a spiritual coma. He got up with difficulty. His knees hurt. His body was tired, but there was something new pulsing inside him, a silent certainty that this was the first day of the rest of his life. He looked around as if seeing everything for the first time. The house was the same. The furniture was in the same place, but the man inside that body was no longer the same. The next day, he took an action that no one expected. The first thing he did was delete all his old posts on social media in which he mocked the faith. Those sharp phrases that he used to use as a flag of pride now caused shame. He no longer wanted to propagate unbelief, not because someone told me to, but because now he knew what was real. Then he looked for a childhood friend, one of those he always ridiculed for being too much of a believer, called him. The conversation was awkward at first, but within a few minutes he began to tell everything. How was that night? How the TV turned on? How preaching entered? How God found him in the depths of pride? This friend didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't judge. He didn't question it, just listened. And in a choked voice he said, "I have always prayed for you." And it was there that he understood that the change was not just his. It was the answer of someone who had been on his knees for a long time. Over the next few days, he began consuming everything he could about Billy Graham. I watched the sermons like someone looking for oxygen. Each word realigned him, redirected him. I didn't want to become a religious person. I wasn't looking for a position. I wanted to be transformed. He wanted to know this God who loved him even when he mocked him. And the more he listened, the more he saw himself in that crowd of ancient crusades. Simple, broken, thirsty people. People like him. He started writing down phrases, writing prayers, reading the Bible, not as a ritual, but as a reunion with someone who had always been there. Each chapter was a mirror, each verse an answer. He discovered passages that spoke exactly to his type of skepticism, like the story of Thomas, like Paul before he became an apostle, like so many others who also mocked, rejected, but were reached, and that made him stronger. Now he walked differently, not because someone taught him to look like a believer, but because the internal stance has changed, the way of seeing people, to react to problems, to deal with the pain. There was an invisible foundation within him, and he was unshakable. If you've heard this story so far, and something inside you is burning, even if it's small, even if it still seems confusing, I want to extend an invitation. Comment the word restart below. If you felt that this story spoke to you, please also comment, God found me, or I'm coming back. These words are not magic, but they are steps, and steps are all God needs to start something new. And don't worry, you're not alone. We will pray for each comment. Let's read every word. And if this video was a call to you, stay with us, because what God started that night is still far from finished. What if this story is about you? I'm not saying this by chance. I'm not trying to create an impact with pretty words or move you with a well-written script. I'm talking to you myself. With that look that is now fixed on the screen, perhaps thinking, how come this story is so similar to mine? Maybe you clicked on this video out of curiosity. Maybe you thought it was just another piece of content to pass the time. Or who knows? You're here because your heart can no longer hide what your mind insists on denying. And if that's it, then listen carefully, because this might not just be a video. This can be a call straight from heaven. Perhaps you have never openly mocked faith. Perhaps I have never said that God does not exist. But what about inside? How many times did you doubt? How many times have you ignored? How many times did you walk away? How many times did you use logic as a shield because your heart was already so hurt that it couldn't bear to feel anymore? How many times have you hidden behind skepticism, sarcasm, coldness, just to avoid having to face the deepest question of all? What if God is still trying to talk to me? What if he is still knocking at the door? What if even with all the falls, with all the phrases you've said, with all the thoughts you've never told anyone, he's still loving you with the same intensity? And if this ancient preaching, this story of a mocker transformed by the voice of Billy Graham, is exactly the mirror that God is using to show you that the time of redemption has arrived? I don't know where you are now. It could be in a dark room, like he was. You may be watching this video in secret without wanting anyone to know. You may be smiling on the outside, with everything seemingly in order, but screaming on the inside. You may be tired, exhausted, no energy to continue. You may have a noisy mind, a tight chest, and a heart full of unanswered questions. But if all this is happening in there, and you're still here with me in this video, then this is not by chance. Do you really think it's a coincidence that you're watching this right now? Just at this moment in your life? After everything you've been through? After everything you hid? Maybe you're like him, too rational to believe, but too broken to continue denying. And it's okay. God knows each person's time. He knows how hard you fought not to believe it. He saw you saying, "That's a fanatic thing." But he also saw you crying silently at night. He heard you when you said you didn't need him. But he also heard that whisper deep in your soul saying, "What if it's true?" The great truth is that you may have ignored God. You may have turned your back. He may have mocked, fled, argued, silenced. But he never stopped listening to you. He never stopped seeing you. He never gave up loving you. And now, he's here, using this story, using this screen, using this voice of mine, using the memory of a preacher who has passed away, but who still preaches with strength, because the Word of God does not die. Maybe you think you don't deserve it. That's past the point. That it's too late. That there were many wrong choices. That the heart has already hardened too much. That the past condemns you. That God would no longer hear you. But all of these are lies that you've heard for so long that they start to seem like truths. But the only truth that matters now is this: God is still speaking to you. And if you're feeling something in there, no matter how small, pay attention. This could be the moment when everything starts to change. This could be the moment that you will remember months, years from now, as the turning point. This could be your living room floor, your kneeling without understanding, your Billy Graham talking to me. It could be now, and I know, maybe you're still resisting, trying to control what you feel, trying to keep your reason in place. But for a second, allow yourself. Allow yourself to feel. Allow yourself to be vulnerable. There's no shame in admitting you need help. It is not weakness to recognize that something bigger is calling you. That's exactly where the strength begins. True strength. That which does not come from the mind, but from the soul. One that does not impose itself, but transforms. I'm not here to convince you with arguments. I'm here to remind you of something you might have forgotten. You are still loved. You are still wanted. You still have purpose. And no matter how much you think you don't believe in anything anymore, deep down, there's still a spark. And a spark in God's hands is all He needs to light a fire of transformation in your life. If you felt that God spoke to you through this video, don't ignore it. You may have clicked here by chance, but you made it to the end because the sky was calling you back. It's not about a well-produced video. It's about a real encounter with the one who never gave up on you. So now, I want to make you a sincere invitation. Subscribe to the channel. Here you will find more than videos. You will find real testimonies of transformation, messages that confront, heal, and awaken what the world tried to erase in you. Each content is prepared with prayer, with purpose, and with the desire to see you closer to God. If you've made it this far, it means something has touched your heart deeply. So comment now below, "I heard the voice of God." Write this as a public declaration that you are coming back, that the Holy Spirit has reached you, that this video, it wasn't in vain. And if you felt that this word really marked you, leave your like. This helps this video reach others who are in the same place you were before watching it. And it doesn't stop here. Watch the next video that is appearing here on the screen now. He is the continuation of this journey, a new part of this story that could also be yours. Click now. God is still speaking, and you are no longer alone.